Good evening, I'm Roger Grimsby. Tonight we begin with the killing of a man who became a legend in his own time, John Lennon, shot down in cold blood.
I heard 5, 6 shots and that was it.
There's blood all over his stomach.
He was dead on arrival.
He's such a peaceful man.
The day began like any other for John Lennon and his wife, Yoko Ono. It was a chilly Monday morning in New York City. By 8 a.m. John had already woken up in their Dakota apartment overlooking Central Park. He spent time reviewing production details for their new album, Double Fantasy, which had released just 3 weeks earlier, on November 17, 1980.
Let's take a chance and fly away.
On the morning of December 8, 1980, John Lennon did a photo shoot for Rolling Stone magazine with his wife, Yoko Ono.
At 11 a.m. John and Yoko were photographed by Annie Leibovitz for Rolling Stone. Initially, Annie wanted to photograph John alone, but he insisted Yoko be included. This iconic photo, John naked, curled around Yoko, would become one of the most haunting images of his life. After the photo shoot, John and Yoko headed to the record plant studio to work on a mix of Walking on Thin Ice.
Walking on thin ice, I'm paying the price.
Around 2 p.m., they returned to their apartment briefly. It was here that John had a chilling encounter with a fan, Mark David Chapman.
John came back out. I don't remember him going back in from the taxi, but he was obviously back in the building. He was doing an RKO radio special. And he came out of the building, and the photographer that I mentioned earlier, Paul Gorish, he kind of pushed me forward and said, here's your chance. You know, you've been waiting all day. You've come from Hawaii to have him sign your album. Go, go. And I was very nervous. And I was right in front of John Lennon.
Chapman handed him a copy of Double Fantasy to sign. John, ever gracious, autographed it, unaware that this would be his killer.
I had a black Bic pen, and I said, John, would you sign my album? And he said, sure.
What was going on in Chapman's mind? And why did he wait hours outside the Dakota for his chance to strike?
He looked at me, as I mentioned earlier, he said, is that all? Do you want anything else? And I felt then and now that he knew something subconsciously, that he was looking into the eyes of the person that was going to kill him.
Keep watching as we unravel this dark obsession. By 5 p.m., John and Yoko returned to the studio for a brief session. They left at 10:30 p.m. and headed back to the Dakota. John was excited about their plans to visit the studio again the next day.
It was dark. It was windy. Jose, the doorman, was out along the sidewalk. And here's another odd thing that happened. I was at an angle where I could see Central Park West and 72nd, and I see this limousine pull up. And as you know, there's probably hundreds of limousines that turn up Central Park West in the evening. But I knew that was his. And I said, this is it.
As they stepped out of their limousine, Mark David Chapman was waiting. At 10:50 p.m., Chapman called out.
Mr. Chapman came up behind him and called to him, Mr. Lennon, as he arrived at that doorway. And then in a combat stance, he emptied the Charter Arms .38 caliber gun that he had with him and shot John Lennon.
Chapman fired 5 shots from a .38 revolver. 4 bullets struck John in the back and shoulder.
John came out, and he looked at me, and I think he recognized, here's the fella that I signed the album earlier. And he walked past me. I took 5 steps toward the street, turned, withdrew my Charter Arms .38, and fired 5 shots into his back.
John was rushed to Roosevelt Hospital in a police cruiser.
Police responded to the scene right away. When they saw the amount of blood coming from Lennon's body, they knew they could not wait for an ambulance. They took him and put him in the back of a cop car and went directly to the hospital. They also arrested the shooter, Mark David Chapman, on the scene.
Despite the efforts of medical staff, he was pronounced dead at 11:15 p.m. The world lost one of its brightest lights.
John Lennon was brought to Roosevelt Hospital, which is Mount Sinai Hospital today. Hospital staff at the time were notified that they had a gunshot victim that needed immediate attention. According to doctors, John Lennon was shot 4 times in the chest, with 3 of the bullets exiting his back.
We just came from a briefing with the head of the emergency department here, Dr. Lynn. He said that Lennon was shot or had maybe 7 wounds to his chest and stomach, and that he was dead certainly when he arrived here at the hospital. There were intense efforts to revive him, transfusion, resuscitation. It did not work.
John Lennon was brought to the emergency room at the Roosevelt site, St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital, this evening, shortly before 11 p.m. He was dead on arrival.
News of John Lennon's death spread like wildfire. Fans gathered outside the Dakota, holding vigils.
Court where she returned home to the Dakota. But at that point, word had gotten out that John Lennon had passed away, and the building was mobbed with fans from all over.
President Jimmy Carter released a statement saying, John Lennon helped the world share a dream of peace. But what drove Mark David Chapman to commit such a heinous act? The disturbing answer lies in his obsession with fame and a certain controversial book. Mark David Chapman was a troubled man. He idolized Lennon but became disillusioned by what he perceived as hypocrisy in Lennon's message of peace. Chapman carried a copy of Catcher in the Rye, claiming it was his statement. He later confessed, I acted alone and cold-bloodedly. I am sorry for what I did.
Chapman's wife says only that she's sorry for Lennon's family.
I'm just still, again, very concerned about Mark, and I'm just very, very sorry that this had to happen to Yoko Ono and her family, and that her husband had to die.
1 week after John Lennon was murdered, a massive outpouring of emotion and tribute around the world and in New York. When we come back, the day more than 200,000 people gathered in Central Park, singing, and then silence.
It's, how many years is it? 80, so the 20, 10, 30 years ago or something. So, and I still get affected by it. Yes, it does. I mean, it does affect me. I felt that we were doing very well in New York together, and that's gone, And the fact that it was gone so suddenly too, I think that affected me, because if it was a slow process, we could have talked about it or anything. But the last John I remember is a very gregarious, energetic, high-spirited guy. It's a kind of sad and very poignant kind of paradox, I think, that he loved this place so much, and that's why he was killed.
Chapman remains in prison to this day. Though John Lennon was taken too soon, his dream of peace and love continues to inspire generations. Let's honor his memory by living those values every day. Thank you for watching. Let us know in the comments how John Lennon's music has touched your life.